In 1985, David graduated college and stepped out into a world where the path to financial security felt paved in stone. 30 years later, Ryan graduated college into a world that looked identical on the surface, but functioned with a completely different internal logic. Despite the 3-decade gap, both men wanted the exact same things: a reliable job, a home of their own, and a retirement they didn't have to fear. But today, David sees hard work and property as the only path to safety, while Ryan views that same system as a trap designed to keep him in debt. Both perspectives are based on reality, because between 1985 and 2015, the rules governing housing, debt, and wages shifted so significantly that these two men are operating from entirely different economic playbooks. David's first job paid $22,000 a year. It wasn't a fortune, but in 1985, his expenses were anchored to a different reality. A modest house in David City cost roughly 3 to 4 times his annual salary.
With manageable student debt and a reliable cost of living, homeownership was a practical goal he could achieve before his 30th birthday. Ryan enters the workforce with a much higher salary, but is immediately eroded by costs David never faced at this scale. Rent, healthcare, and debt repayments consume the majority of his income, while the price of that same modest house has climbed far out of his reach. While David's only financial benchmark was his neighbor, Ryan spends his days scrolling through an endless feed of peers claiming to make millions overnight through crypto and digital brands, creating a constant pressure to find a shortcut to the finish line. David entered an economy where wealth was a slow, invisible build. Ryan entered one where costs are inflated and success looks instantaneous, causing their definitions of a normal financial life to split. By age 30, David is a homeowner. Every mortgage payment he makes increases his equity, quietly building his net worth through a process that requires almost no daily thought. Ryan reaches 30 and finds himself still renting. He watches housing prices climb another 10%, while his friends move back home or take on more roommates just to stay in the city. Faced with a goal that seems mathematically impossible, Ryan's mindset begins to adapt. He gradually convinces himself that ownership isn't actually worth the trouble, and that the flexibility of renting is a superior choice. When a milestone like homeownership feels this exhausting to reach, the logical response is to stop valuing the goal altogether. A reasonable observation about high costs slowly solidifies into a belief that building wealth is no longer possible. David's investment world was small. He had a few mutual funds and a pension. Because he had so few options to change course, he was effectively forced to be a patient, long-term investor. Ryan has every investment vehicle on earth available on his phone, but this infinite choice often leads to paralysis. He spends years researching the perfect entry point while compounding interest quietly passes him by. With the traditional path to assets like housing blocked, Ryan's higher income often flows toward more immediate targets. Premium subscriptions, frequent travel, and lifestyle upgrades provide a sense of progress that a stagnant balance sheet doesn't. This confuses income with wealth. A $200,000 earner who spends everything is less secure than someone earning half that much who acquires assets. Over time, assets do the heavy lifting, while the high-income earner must keep working just to maintain their lifestyle. David's generation was incentivized to own things that grew in private. Ryan's environment incentivizes him to spend his higher paycheck on things people can see, making it easy to earn more while owning less. David viewed the stock market as a risk to be managed. Ryan, having seen housing bubbles and crypto collapses, often views the act of making any decision as the primary risk. This fear often leads Ryan to keep his wealth in cash, believing that inaction is the safest way to protect what he has. But the math of inflation doesn't care about caution. By doing nothing to avoid a market crash, Ryan accepts the guaranteed risk of his money losing its value every single year it sits still. The skepticism felt by Ryan's generation is a logical response to the world they inherited, one defined by stagnant wages, rising inequality, and corporate layoffs. But understanding why a system is difficult doesn't change the requirements for surviving it. The tools and the technology change every decade, but the underlying principles of consistent asset acquisition and compound growth remain the only constants. Wealth isn't built by perfectly predicting the future, it's built by participating in it. David's generation succeeded because they started early and stayed invested, and despite how much the world has changed, that remains the only way out.